Hello everyone, my name is Paul Third, and this week I want to talk to you about a new addition that came into my control room yesterday, and it's in the form of the new topping E8X8 interface. Now, let's kind of think about the setup that I had first, and this will make sense as to why I got this interface and kind of I've made the change to the setup that I have. So, the setup that I had as of before yesterday was the EVO 16 and one SP8 were in this control room. The EVO 16 was the main hub, and it was also acting as conversion for an analog chain that I normally use. And it's basically a vocal analog chain, but there's some stuff in there that I like to use for mixing as well. And then the other SP8 in here was basically just A to D conversion for another 500 series rack that I have sitting on the right-hand side of the desk. I had the SP8 to use, but it was hardly ever getting used. It's the other SP8 that was the more important one. That's the one that was and still is in the live room. So the whole system was basically EVO 16, SP8 in the control room, and SP8 in the live room, and it was all working via ADAT, 24 in, 24 out. What could go wrong, right? What was the issues? First issue I had was 8 preamps, in my opinion, just isn't enough for a working live room. Long story short, there's a drum kit that's way to go in there very soon. A neighbour's putting it in there. I'm letting him use the studio to rehearse and stuff, and he's letting me use the drum kit. And when I was speaking to him, he's right. He was just like, Paul, you're just limiting yourself. And I agreed. And obviously, the reason I agreed was because I always knew that the other SP8 that was in here should have always been in the live room. It's just, I'm very particular, and I I hated having an empty desk, honestly. It sounds crazy, but it was bugging me. So I had that issue, number one. And then number two, the other issue that I had was connectivity. Obviously, if you watch this channel, you'll know that I have a topping DX7 Pro Plus, which is arguably one of the best measuring DAC amps of all time. So when it comes to headphones, and also when it came to like my main speakers in this room, I always wanted to run everything, obviously, through one of the best fucking DAC amps on the market. Now, when I had the Apollo X6, that had 2 sets of ADAT, but it also had coaxial SPDIF. I sold the X6 for very specific reasons, because it didn't work with my workflow. Add to the fact that its ADAT wasn't full ADAT, it was SMUX, which meant that it didn't really work, because if I wanted access to that other SP8, I would need to go at 96K, which then meant that I only had 4 channels of the SP8 through there. It was just never ever going to work. But I did really enjoy having the coaxial SPDIF. Now, with the EVO 16, you can get optical SPDIF if you use one of their ADAT ports, but obviously, as we've established, both ADAT ports were being taken up by the SP8s. So what I used to have to do was I would set it up in a way that I would have the DX7 Pro Plus like running through, I think, ADAT 2, and then ADAT 1 was doing the live room. And what I found was over time that was kind of a fixed setup. And unfortunately, that 500 series setup with the SP8 was being neglected and never used. Right, so we've got not enough preamps, we've got connectivity issues for the DX7 Pro Plus, and then that brings me to the next issue, which was the headphone amp. Now, many people may be confused because obviously I use the DX7 Pro Plus for headphones when I'm mixing. However, when I'm, recording the podcast, I'm using the direct monitoring through my chain so I can hear it in real time. And also the Riverside audio comes through, and then I balance them in the EVO software. So I was using the EVO 16 headphone amp out of necessity. The issue with the EVO 16 headphone amp is that it doesn't really have any power, and it can't really cleanly power any hungry headphones. Now, I use the heaphone Dara closed. The issue I have when I'm recording is that there's sometimes, even at like 85% fucking volume, and I can fucking kind of still hear things, I'll get the odd peak of distortion. And at first, I remember, I was scratching my head thinking like, oh my God, like what's to do with the mic? Like what's to do with the chain? I was like, Ed, could you hear distortion? It's like, no, you're fine. And I remember I was like playing about with things, and I was bringing the gain down in the 1073, and I changed mic and everything. And it turns out it was just the headphone amp crapping out. So for my particular needs, I need a good headphone amp that's got enough power to drive the heaphone Dara closed and to drive them cleanly. So when I'm tracking, I know that any distortion that I hear is coming from the microphone, or it's coming from, you know, the gear that I'm using. It's coming from the recording. That's absolutely vital whenever you're tracking using direct monitoring with headphones. Now, many people may argue, well, Paul, just use headphones that are more sensitive. I used to use the Olo S5X, but being honest with you, the headphone amp just sounds like shit. It doesn't sound good. The Lauten EVO 16 doesn't really sound good. And honestly, it's been a constant issue of mine just trying to find an interface that was going to give me the workflow that I was after, but just fucking gave me good DAC to speakers. Right, so we've established the 4 main issues that I had. Particular old me, right? How did the topping E8X8 fix those issues? So, number 1, by moving the E8X8 into the EVO 16 position, so it's acting as the main conversion for all of that kind of vocal chain rack right on the left-hand side. That then allowed me to move the EVO 16 over to the right-hand side, where I kind of have what was the redundant kind of 500 series rack kind of sitting over there. With the EVO 16 being moved, that also meant that the SP8 was able to be moved into the live room, which means that I've now got 16 preamps with the 2 SP8s in the live room. So if I need to do drums or again multi-tracks, then I've got this 24 in, 24 out setup that's all connected via ADAT. Now, the really, really handy thing with having the 24 I/O setup with the EVO 16 kind of all set up for the multi-track side is that when it comes to the mixing side, I can utilize the 2 ADAT outs of the E8X8. ADAT 1 is optical SPDIF and ADAT 2 is for sending out 8 channels over ADAT, which also means that the topping E8X8 can be used as a standalone preamp for a interface that has ADAT in, i.e. EVO 16, an ID14, or even like a Focusrite Claret. So if you needed more preamps, you can have that in standalone, still use the direct monitoring, which is great because all the direct monitoring for every channel is on the interface itself, and you just press the button, then it'll come out your headphones for direct monitoring, which I think is really, 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 really great. So I am right now utilizing the optical SPDIF, which is ADAT 1 of the E8X8, and that's going straight to the topping DX7 Pro Plus. Now, just as an added note for topping, if you're watching, I do recommend that you make an SP8 kind of style version of the E8X8. The topping E2X2, E4X4, and now the E8X8, its ADC measures comparative to an Apollo X16 and even an RME Babyface Pro FS. It is arguably, one of the best ADCs out there in an interface. Honestly, topping, you're missing the boat. Topping E8X8 Lite, right? I'm coining that now. Add in ADAT in and out, and you will be surprised at how many people use that to expand in their system. Sell it for £300, honestly. Voila. Just a tip. Now, many people will assume that I have absolutely no need for ADAT 2, which is sending 8 channels out. I actually do. So what I'm using the second ADAT port for is, again, another fucking, honestly, the amount of long ADAT cables I need in the studio. I'm sending another 10 meter fucking ADAT cable out from ADAT 2 to one of the SP8s to their ADAT in. So that's receiving the audio from the DAW, which is then being fed out to a Fosse Audio PHO5, which is a 5-channel headphone amp splitter. It's only like 40 to 50 quid, and it has 310 milliwatts at 32 ohms, and roughly that equates to, in realistic terms, about 50-55 milliwatts per channel at 32 ohms, which is pretty decent, especially if you're using headphones with a relatively high sensitivity. You'll be able to power all 5 quite consistently. So as much as you may think that just having ADAT out would have been useless for me, it was actually really necessary for me to make this whole thing work. Right, so that's the connectivity side. That was number 2. Right, so number 3, the headphone quality. Now, for anybody that's watched the topping E4X4 video, they'll know that the headphone amp in the topping range of interfaces is arguably like the biggest selling point, because they have clean linear headphone amps with quite a lot of gain in there. Not as good as, their main like DAC amps and, their standalone headphone amps, but they outperform nearly every audio interface that I could think of. In comparison to the EVO 16 headphone amp, it's just night and day. And in regards to the gain with the Sandara closebacks, I've got it just around halfway. And that's given me more than enough volume to be able to hear myself and Ed for doing the podcast. So I've got enough headroom, clean headroom, and that's for direct monitoring, which is even better. Obviously, again, if you were to use that for mixing, it shows you that it's got the headroom, because obviously the track's going to be louder, you're going to be feeding louder levels into it, so you're not going to need as much gain in your headphone amp. And what I love, again, I've mentioned it before, is I keep on looking at it because it's right there, is the fact that it's got the direct monitoring buttons on the interface themselves. And it's quite handy, especially if you've got an analog chain, because it's quite easy to monitor each part of the chain. So again, I can isolate the 1073. I could then hear what the channel strip sounds like. And if you've got something, say, maybe 3-4 pieces of outboard, you can monitor them individually. And then you can kind of see if there's an issue in the chain. And you can do it all from, the front panel, which I find really handy. Right, so that's the third issue sorted. The last issue, which is the monitoring side, so the DAC to speakers. I've said it before in the topping E4X4, and I've said it in other episodes of the Working Audio Tools. I really like the DAC to speakers of the topping range of interfaces. It's interesting because the DAC doesn't measure on paper as good as, most of their other DACs. But it's still a good DAC. It still sounds relatively clean. The jitter's very, very, very low, which is really important. And it's got a solidity to it. It doesn't have that haze that I hear in the EVO line. It sounds reminiscent-ish of, say, like a modern Audient, like an ID44, or even the Aurea DAC that's through there. But I would actually go as far to say that I prefer the E8X8 DAC to the Audient Aurea. Genuinely, I think the DAC is pretty good. It's not as good as the topping DX7 Pro Plus, but it's good enough for me to use speakers in here with confidence. So in the studio, I've got currently the Edifier S3000 Mark II going through the RCA input of the topping DX7 Pro Plus, which is running through the optical SPDIF of the E8X8. So that's receiving digital audio from there. I've then got the Tantrum Angry boxes running through the TRS line out. So that's 1 and 2. Now, the great thing about the E8X8 is that it gives you, in terms of for line out 1 and 2, it gives you an option of TRS or an option of the XLR, which is great for me, as what that means is I can use the 1/4-inch input of the Presonus Era Studio 8 and then have that going through the Audient EVO 16, which is great because what that means is that no matter what system I am tracking with, I always have a pair of monitors that I can use for tracking. The great thing about, the way things are sounding just now is that I don't really feel that I'm losing that much quality from going to the DX7 Pro Plus to the line outs of the E8X8. The DX7 Pro Plus is better, but it's not like when I'd switch to the EVO and I'd be like, whoa, this is horrible. Where are my transients? And it sounds smeary and it just sounded like a fucking haze over it. It just wasn't for me. The DAC to speakers in the E8X8 has a solidity to everything. It keeps the transients, it keeps the punch. Everything sounds clear. I don't get that haze. And, I've got enough line outs now to even add another pair of monitors. I'm maybe actually thinking of bringing back the Kali IN5s or maybe the IN-UNF if we've got the room. And for anybody asking, Paul, why did you not just think of getting a kind of an all-in-one interface like a Lynx Aurora N32? That would give you enough I/O and it's got a really, really good conversion. And yes, it would. That probably would be a really, really, really amazing setup in here. But it's fucking $6,500 and the headphone amp in it is shit for low-ohm headphones. Actually, I made a note of it, right, just before we go, because I like to be a little bitch, okay? Right, so let's get into the headphone out specs here, right? So for high impedance headphones, it's actually very, very, very good. 135 milliwatts at 300 ohms, which is more than the E8X8, which is 105 milliwatts at 300 ohms. And at 600 ohms, it's 68 milliwatts, which is more than the E8X8, which is 55 milliwatts. However, the issue is with the Lynx Aurora that for $6,500, it falls apart basically, in a sense, with hungry low ohm headphones. So if you are looking to put your hungry planars through a Lynx Aurora, I probably wouldn't suggest it, as it only has 212 milliwatts at 32 ohms in comparison to the E8X8 that has 580 milliwatts at 32 ohms. So that's double the power. And then if we go down to 16 ohm, which are some fucking planars, 100 milliwatts compared to the topping, which is 390 milliwatts at 16 ohm. So yes, I could have spent $6,500, but I still would have had to use a fucking headphone up. So and there you have it, right? This entire system is, let me see, 400, 800, 1200, around 1600. Around 1600 if you add the top-end DX7 Pro Plus, which is now discontinued, by the way. I'm sorry. It's going to break many people's hearts that were looking at it. It's now discontinued. Sorry. But if you add that price into it, it's probably about $2,000, because you might be able to pick it up second-hand now. Maybe 500 quid, maybe. So for around $2,000, 32 IO with arguably some of the best conversion on the market. Who can ask for more, right? I know who. People on the internet. Hey. Fuck yes. Right, okay, I need to stop now. Wow, this is really, really long.